The key to any good narrative lies within its characters, ones that develop through the world they are placed in and act naturally while being a part of that world. If the characters fail to portray any form of intrigue, the story will often fail. Video games are no exception to this. Some games do not focus on a complex story. Instead, they place their resources on other aspects such as the core gameplay loop, fluid mechanics, or stunning visuals. But the games that resonate with me the most are those that offer a rich story with interesting or memorable characters. I often end up thinking about them long after I completed the playthrough, and are those that I would recommend to others. In modern times, people don't have much time to spend playing video games, so it is increasingly important to find a game that will make that time feel worth it. This brings up the issue of trying to maintain the audience throughout the runtime. It is crucial to get the player invested quickly, and one of the fastest ways to do this is by having a memorable
Superhero landing. She's gonna do a superhero landing. Wait for it! Woo! Superhero landing! Yeah, that's really hard on your knees.
As with my other video, this is my interpretation of the research that I found and should by no means represent anything concrete. I encourage anyone who is interested or has time to read the papers I will reference and make their own conclusions. I might misinterpret the information or the ideas that the author meant to present with their papers. I am only here to talk about my experiences and hopefully try to relate them to some scholarly papers. I don't want this to be a place where arguments break out simply because people have differing ideas about a topic. This is meant to be for fun and for entertainment only. Now, let's get back to the video. Before talking about video games, it helps to look at a familiar example, which is cinema. In the animated movie Kung Fu Panda, we are instantly introduced to Po in his dream, where he is a Kung Fu master. The movie then subverts our expectations by showing us Po outside his dream in reality. We see that he is just a regular citizen that really likes Kung Fu, but is probably bad at it. We can infer this from his failed attempts at sticking the shurikens to the wall. In addition, we see his room, which is filled with either noodle bowls, scrolls, and Kung Fu related decorations, such as posters of the Kung Fu masters he idolizes. Continuing further, we see how clumsy and silly Po is, which really resembles his panda character. He falls down the stairs, leaves his shurikens in a customer's soup, and calls this goose his dad.
Sorry, Dad.
In about 4 minutes of screen time, we are able to understand Po and his life. This is a great hook to the movie and our protagonist. As a viewer, we want to see how this plays out for him. Cohen 2001 explores the idea of what identification is. He defines identification as a mechanism through which audience members experience reception and interpretation of the text from the inside, as if the events were happening to them. This occurs when the audience experiences events from the character's perspective. With Po, the audience is able to relate to him instantly, having your dreams be out of reach or being in a position where they are unattainable. We are able to understand his character and want him to succeed. We begin to replace our identity and role with the identity and role of the characters we are watching. This is crucial because we must be able to place ourselves in those positions, rather than only relating to them. This heightens what we feel towards the character when observing them. A game that does this really well is Celeste. Celeste is a game that takes the player on a journey to climb a mountain with the protagonist, Madeline. It shows us what Madeline is experiencing throughout the playthrough. We don't need exposition or dialogue to understand what she is going through, although there is dialogue and it only adds to the game rather than just relying on it. To its core, Celeste is a game about failure, setbacks, and the motivation to push forward. It explores this concept in both its gameplay and its story. Only by progressing through the game, we are able to see and experience Madeline's internal struggle become more prominent. We get to experience it with her, failing a difficult platforming section multiple times until finally beating it, only to be rewarded with an even harder platforming challenge. Clement in 2009 explains this by suggesting that emotional attachment increases when we experience the same actions as the character. In this case, the game's constant push of failure, anxiety, and perseverance. We as a player progress with Madeline, and we learn to subconsciously internalize the doubts and failures of repeating the same sections over and over again. Madeline eventually verbalizes her doubts to Theo, but by this point, we are already aware and understand them. This dialogue simply confirms what the player has already been feeling throughout the playthrough. We feel as if we are part of the true narrative, rather than what is just shown to us on the surface. All of this shows how a game can invest a player in a character quickly before the narrative is shown. You already experienced the core ideas of the game in the first act. So the topic of this video isn't really about character introductions, but how games draw us in early in their playthrough through characters. Getting the audience's attention early is more important in movies where there is a limited runtime. Games are not chained by this constraint. They can spend as much time as they want building up the game and its characters, assuming it's within their budget. Jenkins in 2004 explains that developers act as narrative architects rather than storytellers. Not all games tell stories. Games may be an abstract, expressive, and experiential form. They communicate their ideas differently than films and shows. They are fundamentally different in that they have an advantage over cinema when it comes to world building. Developers design spaces that players are meant to experience rather than simply observe. Films and shows often rely on dialogue or exposition to convey information fast and efficiently. This is a classic show-not-tell form of storytelling that can diminish the viewer's interest and investment in the media. In video games, narrative information must be redundantly presented across a range of spaces and artifacts, since one cannot presume the player will necessarily locate or recognize the significance of any given element. This quote is key. It explains why films often explain things through dialogue and why video games often have plenty of hidden detail for players to discover. It keeps them invested and allows us to connect with the world and its characters. By playing the game through a certain character, we see the world through their perspective. They grab us by staying true to their personality while interacting with their environment, other characters, and whatever goal they are trying to accomplish. As a result, having a character that does this at the start of the game hooks players before any important narrative could be introduced. This is somewhat prominent in open world games, where you have a massive world to explore and many distractions that will get you sidetracked from the main story. While the introduction of characters in open world games does start from the narrative, if we want to fully experience the story, you need to complete everything, which is not something most people do. So it becomes increasingly important to hook the player early, so that they would want to spend more time in the game and explore the world. Genshin is a great example of this. After completing the first main story quest, you are left with more answers than questions, not only regarding the story, but also the characters. It does a really good job hooking players in, even though it's not presented in the best way and has some storytelling flaws. You interact with the world through your characters, each one with unique character traits and personalities, which makes it feel that they are part of the world rather than a means for the narrative. It is likely that people would not continue playing the game if they were not interested in the characters and only found exploring fun. There are many games that do a much better job with their exploration. It is much more engaging and less repetitive, but Genshin puts a lot of effort into its characters for obvious reasons. On screen are a few papers that share the same general principles. Audiences becomes invested in characters when they feel psychologically and experientially placed within the character's world, or seeing it through the character's eyes. Rather than solely relying on exposition or heavy dialogue, players can learn through the actions and engaging with their surroundings. Once the player starts to realize the character's goals, we become emotionally attached to them. We internalize their experiences as if it was our own, wanting to experience their story alongside them rather than just being an observer. A game that does this really well is Crosscode. It is a 2D action RPG set in an MMO. The game itself has a great story, which is heightened by its characters. The protagonist Leah is introduced with a malfunctioning voice module. This limits her speech to only a few words throughout the game, resulting in a naturally quiet character. The game takes full advantage of this and leans into this constraint as part of the narrative. Leah has many expressions, reactions, and emotional responses to things going on around her. These feel grounded and inherently human instead of simply being a video game protagonist. As a player, we are able to understand her emotions and connect with Leah. This is a great way to introduce a character. By giving them a flaw, we're instantly invested in their story and if or how they will be able to achieve their goals. In Leah's case, how she will be able to communicate with those around her. This hooks us to the narrative and pulls our focus to the character's expressions rather than just the dialogue. The game further strengthens this with Emily, one of Leah's party members who's energetic and likes to talk a lot. She is a natural foil to Leah's quiet behavior. The two characters interact in a a way that feels organic, and would simply be the natural way these two characters with these two personalities would interact. It's so well written that you get to a point in the game where Emily learns that Leah has a speech issue instead of just being a quiet person. We as a player get to experience not only Leah's perspective, but are also given some perspective of her party members. The message Crosscode presents is about human relationships. As you progress and encounter new enemies, explore new areas, and meet other characters, you start to get a sense that developers really cared about their characters. Even the NPCs have great dialogue prompts that we can relate to as people. As a result, we have a game that provides a deeply human narrative tied to interpersonal relationships through its characters. Crosscode and Celeste highlight how a character's personality and emotions can be shown with very little dialogue, but this idea of storytelling through characters only works if we actually become invested in these characters. Every character exists in some world, and if the world is not immersive, it could be difficult to be invested in the characters inhabiting it, so we need to establish an immersive medium for our characters. Silent protagonists are not rare in video games, or even other forms of media. A great example outside of games is Wall-E. Wall-E is a character who speaks very little, but still managed to capture the viewer's attention through sounds, body language, and how he interacts with his surroundings. We are quickly invested in his story, as well as how the world around him ended up in its current state. Jenkins in 2004 explains that in video games, characters interact with the world around them, that being objects, other characters, or the environments they are in. This is environmental storytelling, and great video games often place a lot of effort into the spaces their characters occupy to make the game feel more alive. This concept connects well with Bordwell's work on narrative structure. He notes that limiting information early in a story encourages the audience to interpret events for themselves. Instead of explaining everything, viewers are actively engaged in thinking about what they are seeing. In the context of video games, this approach gives the player the freedom to explore the world at their own pace, gradually piecing together their own personal meaning through interaction and observation. As a player spends more time in these worlds, the sense of immersion increases, making the eventual payoff feel more earned and meaningful. A good example of environmental storytelling is in the game Journey. This game has zero dialogue. Instead, it relies on traditional exposition to tell its story. As the player progresses through the game, they start to understand the world and the message of the game just by simply exploring the different environments. The developers intentionally designed the game this way so that each player can interpret their journey differently. Every space contains its own symbolic meaning, which is presented through visual design, atmosphere, and what the player can interact with rather than spoken words. As a result, the more time the player spends exploring this world, the more they will be able to piece together the story. While this method at first may seem less focused on the character and more towards the narrative, the spaces the player moves through build emotional engagement. Without spoiling the game for those who have not played, one of the game's greatest strengths is how it encourages players to progress slowly and reflect on their experiences. Because there is no dialogue, it becomes easier for the player to feel like they are personally experiencing a journey through the character they control. The level design of the game reinforces this idea, using the surroundings to provoke emotions and thought. Journey is one of those rare games that almost makes you feel like you are watching a movie. Once you finish the game, you look back and reflect on your own journey and how you felt during and after the playthrough. After I finished the game, I went online to see other people's interpretations of the story. Many people had the same general ideas about what the game was presenting, which, in a game with zero dialogue, is quite impressive. The developers managed to present the essence of life in a game that you can complete in about 2 or 3 hours. On the flip side, there are also games that have great environmental storytelling, but still struggle to connect the player to the protagonist. I personally experienced this with Horizon Zero Dawn. I do like this game, but I did not feel connected to Aloy in a way that some other players do. Instead, I found myself far more invested in the story and history of the world rather than its characters. I felt more a part of the world simply exploring it, uncovering secrets myself rather than talking to other characters or progressing through the story. One possible explanation could be that I would not respond to a lot of the situations in the same manner that Aloy does. Her reactions make sense with the context of her character, and the life that she lived in the story, but they do not always align with how I personally might respond, which is probably why I always choose the least violent option when it comes to the dialogue wheels. I understand this happens in other games as well. It's impossible for any player to 100% relate or respond in the same way the character does. It's the same reason as why people can't fully empathize or sympathize with someone else. Everyone experiences their own reality, all versions of which are real. Another factor may be how the characters move and speak. In some cases, the animations and dialogue delivery felt unnatural. They pulled me out of being immersed. Interestingly, this was not a problem with Celeste or Crosscode, even with a more limiting pixel art style. Pixel art games are more limited in a sense that they have fewer elements to work with when creating expressions and how the characters can look while performing certain actions. In contrast, highly detailed 3D games rely on complex animations, motion capture, and multiple animators working on a single character just to show one small expression. But sometimes, when these systems aren't perfect, they can break immersion. To conclude, players relate to characters more if we are fully able to immerse ourselves in the perspective of the character. When a game allows us to experience the world alongside the character we control, it becomes much easier for the player to get that connection. The most memorable games are able to do this without relying on dialogue to tell their story. Instead, developers build immersion through objects, other characters, and surrounding spaces. The characters any one player will relate to the most will vary depending on the person's personal experiences in life. This is what makes storytelling in video games so great. We're able to visually experience a world and story that are meaningful on a personal level. In a sense, we are part of something larger than ourselves. While many people use stories as a form of escapism, certain characters can still ground us in reality by expressing emotions, struggles, and situations that feel deeply human. Most people could probably spend hours talking about the shows, movies, or even video games that resonate with them the most, and how those stories help them process real-life experiences or how they helped us through difficult times in our lives. Something that might seem average to one person can easily become someone else's favorite story. We often search for characters and narratives like these because in a way we are looking for pieces of ourselves in them. When a story or character manages to validate our thoughts, emotions, or experiences, it goes from simple entertainment into something we can connect with, share with others, and remember long after it is over. If you made it to the end of this video, hello, I appreciate you watching until the end. These videos take a little bit of time to make, so it's actually nice when someone listens to everything I have to say, even though all of it is just random ideas I have while I'm playing games. I have another topic in mind, so I'll start working on that. Hopefully I can finish it before I go to work and not be here for 3 or 4 months.